Welcome to SAR's main membership meeting. I am Judy Covington, and I am honored to be here as your 2020 president. This month, we have a great speaker ahead, but before we get to our speaker, I'd like to invite our CEO, Dave Tanner, to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. So please stand.
Okay. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Dave.
Thank you, President Judy.
As I said earlier today, we are fortunate to have a great speaker, and that great speaker happens to be Police Chief Daniel Hahn. Daniel Hahn was sworn in as Sacramento's 45th Chief of Police on August 11, 2017. He was hired by the Sacramento Police Department as a community service officer in 1987 and rose through the ranks to captain. He served in numerous assignments, including Special Investigations Commander, Patrol Commander, and Personnel Division Commander. In 2017, Police Chief Hahn was sworn in as Roseville's 15th Chief of Police and served for 6 years before returning to Sacramento. Yay, Sacramento. Chief Hahn holds a bachelor's degree in business administration and a master's in public administration. As Sacramento's police chief, he has handled controversial issues, implemented new strategies to build transparency in the community, and improve the department's process of recruiting, hiring, and training. Chief Hahn is a member of the California Police Chiefs Association and has been honored with the Exemplary Leaders Award, Service Above Self Award, Community Service Award, and Innovation for Change Award. Chief Hahn is a committed and proud father of 2 incredible daughters and a dedicated husband to his beautiful wife, Katrina. And as always, in his spare time, he enjoys spending time with his family and watching his daughter's sporting events. So let's give a hearty welcome to Police Chief Daniel Hahn.
Thank you, Judy. So it's all, I mean, I don't know how many times I've done this, probably 2 or 3 times at least with this association. So it's always a pleasure, always a great turnout. And I'd be remiss if I didn't at least start by saying I dropped off after the last time I met with at this meeting. I asked one of the things that the realtors, realty agents could do to help our community is hand out information when you sell a house. A lot of information about where people can gather resources. So for example, when people move to Sacramento, you sell them a house or they move to a new neighborhood. It's helpful, I think, for them to know where they can access different things. And so I think I dropped off, I don't remember, 100 bags of information to your office. So I just want to say thank you for handing those out. If you're out or you need more, please let me know. I think that's a big help as we progress along through the years. There's new resources. I'll mention one of them in a minute, but there's a new department being created in Sacramento. So, you know, in future bags of information I would give you, it would have that sort of information. And I think it's really important for people that are in our community know how to access different, either access to the police department for different things or other resources. So anyway, thank you. I think that's really critical and a good welcome in addition to all the things you do for people when they buy a house in our city. So kind of brings us together as a community. So I was asked by the leadership of the association to cover a couple of things. I want to run through them real quick and then I'll hit on each one for a little bit and then we'll open it up for questions. So one is the social unrest that we've seen in our city over the last couple of months, the impact on our department and morale, and then balancing policing, the defunding question, protesters versus looters, and then the impact of COVID on what we do. So I'll start with the social unrest. As you all know, Sacramento is the capital of California, and we have multiple protests on a daily basis. So for example, just as a snapshot, starting at the end of May and for 77 days, we kind of took a snapshot and looked at how many protests that we staffed, meaning our officers worked the protests. There was 98 protests in 77 days. So they're not all about George Floyd. They're any number of things, whether it's SEIU protesting or farmers coming here because it's the capital, trying to influence the legislature. So the protests run the gamut, but our officers are charged with ensuring that, you know, their rights to protest are protected and that everything's safe. And so that's not going to change. As the capital of California, we will continue to have protests throughout the city. So these latest protests, whether they were over the last, bless you, Carter, whether they were about Stephon Clark a couple years ago that ran for about a year, or George Floyd, or the ones this last 4 or 5 days with the Antifa type groups. We really work to protect the protesters' rights to protest while keeping everything safe. And generally, our protesters, the standard protest is typically speeches, chants, walking around in the street, usually end up either at Cesar Chavez Park or the Capitol. Those are all fine. And I would say in general, the organization Black Lives Matter that conducts these protests have never really been violent. They've never really caused damage in our city. And they are like what I would call a true protest that we should value and that we work to protect and ensure everything's safe. What we saw over the last couple days is a group called Antifa and other like groups. People came from out of town as far away as Seattle and Portland, Auburn, Shingle Springs, Nevada City, and came here starting last Thursday. They posted things like wear all black, don't snitch, bring your tools, and they showed up. And if you look at our social media, either my social media, the department's social media, you'll see the way the vast majority of them were dressed, all black, covering their entire face, not just for COVID, but like a full ski mask type thing. Helmets, metal, like riot helmets, if you will, sticks, backpacks. At one point, some of the people were handing out water spray bottles. Well, I should say spray bottles. I have no idea what was inside them. I'm pretty sure it wasn't water. So, you know, those are the sort of things that they would spray on officers if they got the chance. They had rocks, spray paint. They put spray cans on the end of like PVC pipe type things, and they would have some sort of device that could make the spray paint go off. And so they'd reach it up to the surveillance cameras that are high up on poles, and they'd spray paint over the lens. The reason they carry umbrellas is one, to deflect any less lethal thing that could be shot at them, but more so, they would constantly stand in front of like the news media that was out there and hold the umbrella so the news media couldn't film what they were doing. And so they would have them in the back of the group. And so as they're breaking windows, trying to light buildings on fire, the people with umbrellas would block the news cameras from being able to videotape that. Or the surveillance cameras, they'd either spray paint or hold a flag on the end of the pole or something in front of the camera so you couldn't see who's doing those sort of things. And so they showed up on Thursday. There's probably about 200, 250. They walked around downtown smashing windows and spray painting everything in sight. They threw some sort of thing on fire inside of the DA's office, trying to light the DA's office on fire. It didn't catch anything on fire. So we were moving in at that point, but then they left. And so the next night they did more of the same, Friday night, but not quite as bad. And then on Saturday night, we continually changed our tactics, and they spray painted several buildings as they walked, but they didn't break any windows, ended up early back at Chavez Park and kind of gave up and went home. And then the last 2 nights, they've been on social media calling for people to show up and saying, hey, our numbers are dwindling. You need to show up. We need to do all this stuff. And they only got 20 people. They never left the park, and they kind of just gave up and went to their cars and left, including last night. I would not call this group protesters. because they're not. I mean, if you look at the regular protests like a BLM or any number of the other groups that regularly protest in our city, they have chants like call and response chants where the leader will be on a bullhorn and say, you know, some saying, and the crowd will all very loudly chant back. They tried to do this in the Antifa group, and the person would yell out on a bullhorn and only like 3 people would respond. Like the crowd wouldn't, like they didn't even know what the chant was. Because their sole purpose, if you look around the country, is to destroy the city. The Antifa, they're anti-government. They want to destroy cities. They want to entice police officers into a confrontation. They will assault officers as soon as the officers engage. And so really the tack we took was, we are going to monitor them, but we are not going to insert our officers into the crowd to get into this physical confrontation where people will get hurt and they will spray us with whatever's in those bottles. And officers will end up fighting with these folks and be a large melee over smaller level things like simple vandalism. That doesn't mean that's not horrible for the businesses, because the businesses downtown have been like beat up constantly for the last couple of months. Their windows broken in it. You know, the earlier protests a couple of months ago, they were just widespread looting all throughout their businesses. And I'm sure some businesses probably ended up closing because of that. So it's not that that doesn't hurt us and make us feel, but for them. And if somebody kind of gets away from the group, we'll arrest them if they've done some of those things. And more so, we will get them identified from the different camera angles that we have or the crew we had out in the street, and we'll arrest them later like we have in previous protests. In the second night, there was a guy that the community members told us had a gun in the protest. So we ended up getting him stopped at the end of the night and got the gun. It wasn't a real gun, it was a BB gun, but if you look at our social media, it looks just like a Glock handgun. You would not know the difference. Yet he was walking around with it. Another guy had a sword. So they're walking around with bats and all sorts of things. So I wouldn't call those protests. So I make a clear distinction on all the interviews I do between the protests and the folks that come just to destroy our city. And I will say this, we've gotten a lot of put from our sheriff, who did not do us any favors by having a press conference, like a law and order press conference, demanding people get arrested and demanding this confrontation. That was not helpful. He did not tell me he was doing that. I don't really appreciate that. To retired law enforcement saying on social media and other venues that are public that the leadership of the department failed us because they allowed some graffiti and some damage to our city. All I have to say to all those people is the results speak for themselves. Our city is calm. Not one person got hurt in this whole the last 4 days of protest. Not a police officer, not a community member. No buildings were looted. No buildings were caught on fire. Yes, there was some damage and that sucks. But you look at these other cities that are going harder than we went, and they're on fire and people are dying and officers are getting hurt and community members are getting hurt. And they're on their 4th month of constant protests, whether it's Portland, Seattle, Chicago, Austin, Oakland. All these cities are not what we are right now. And I don't want to be them. So that's what I'd say about the protests. The impact on morale, it's really tough when our retired law enforcement say, basically, you guys failed because you didn't go crack heads. And that's hard on the culture of our department, as these people were the leaders in the past of this department. And our young officers are listening to these people that used to be their leaders, telling them that what we're doing right now is failure and that they should go crack heads. It's really unfortunate that we want to take law enforcement back to the past, which caused us to be in the mess that we're in now. And so as long as I'm the chief, I will not allow that to happen. We will continue to try to be as even-handed and compassionate to all people involved. We will not let people get hurt in our city. We will not let buildings burn down. We will not. And so we will play each one by ear. So with all things considered, I think morale is pretty good, but those sort of things do not help. And I really wish more people would stand up and say that, for example, this last protest, the results speak for themselves. Our city is doing good right now compared to these other cities. There's no buildings burning, nobody hurt, et cetera, et cetera. So we didn't make the national news, although I just was told before I was on the national news for something earlier, but not for these protests. So, you know, it's tough. Our officers are working long hours, multiple days. You know, this last one, they're on their 6th day in a row, working long hours on skirmish lines where they're constantly being yelled at, cussed at, thrown metal objects, rocks being thrown at them. So it's just, you know, it's not only a long shift, but it's pretty contentious circumstances for all those hours. And so it's tough on them. I couldn't be more proud the way they handled these last protests because our city's still standing. So the defunding question. I think there's multiple definitions of what defunding is, depending on who you talk to. Some people defunding means eliminate the police department. Some people believe defunding means take some of the money away from the police department and pay for other community-focused sort of things. And I'll just say, kind of as a general statement, what I've said to the reporters. If defunding means reduction in our officers or our professional staff, it will make our community less safe. And by that, I mean our busiest areas in our city are the very communities that the people calling for defunding are claiming to want to help, saying things like Del Paso Heights is over-policed, Meadowview is over-policed. Those areas are the busiest areas in the city for community calling for the police department to assist. The largest volume of calls that we get from community is Del Paso Heights, and it's been that way for decades. It's thousands of more calls than any other area that the community calls 911 or a non-emergency number. If we cut police officers, neighborhoods like the Fab 40s will not notice at all. There's no police officers driving up and down the streets right now in the Fab 40s. But the cut will come from places like Del Paso Heights because that's where the officers are working. And so to me, it's less about defunding and more about what do we really want from our law enforcement and what do we want as a society. I'll give you an example. We had a recent officer-involved shooting over by Sac State in the apartment complex that serves as quasi-dorms for Sac State. They're public apartments, so anybody can rent an apartment, but they're close to Sac State and they're really kind of meant to be dorms for Sac State. And unfortunately, we got into a shooting with a 21-year-old young man and he died. We constantly as a society say, what could law enforcement have done better? And I agree we should do that. We should do that every single time because whether it's legal or not, say it's perfectly legal. If there's some other way we could have changed the outcome, we need to examine that so we do that the next time. Whether it's legal or not, we should always look at that. But the larger question we should also ask is what as society could we have done to prevent that young man from laying on the ground and dying? So not just the last 10 minutes of his life when law enforcement came in contact with him, but his whole life. He was a foster kid. He went to prison for a crime and they paroled him to an unknown community that he didn't know anything about in Sonoma. And he had a lot of, this is according to his family, a lot of challenges in foster care and all those things. So could we as a society done something differently earlier in his life that he would have never ended up there, in addition to looking at what law enforcement could have done differently? That's, to me, the issue that we really need to look at because we're leaving too many people behind. And for example, right now, they're letting people out of prison for COVID and whatever other reasons. And as just a local example, we called Vacaville State Prison. They let 30 to 40 people out of prison a day. So if that person getting out of prison knows where they're going, say they're going to go back to their wife or their husband's house, or they're going to go to their mom's house or whatever, that's where they're going to leave prison to. Then the prison drives them to Greyhound and they get a ticket to whatever city that was and they go home. But there's a lot of people that don't have a place to go like that. So they just go, I don't know where I'm going to go. So the prison drives them to Greyhound and tells them, get a ticket to wherever you're going to go. The corrections doesn't know where that is. And they just tell them, whenever you get to wherever you're going, within 24 hours, check in with the local parole office, which they have no idea where the local parole office is. They're going to a strange city. They don't know where that is. They'd have to look it up, I guess. So these folks buy tickets, and they generally group up with other guys getting out of prison so they don't go alone. And they tell us that they often pick Sacramento because they're told Sacramento has a lot of homeless services. So they get a bus ticket to Sacramento, even though they're not from here. And then we see like 10 guys walking down the street, still in their corrections jumpsuits, with their little plastic bag of their property that the prison releases them from prison with, and they're walking around downtown. And they tell us, well, we thought Sacramento had good homeless services, so we're here. And so corrections tells us that they have a lot of, the vast majority of these folks now have warrants for parole violation because they never check in with that parole office that they have no idea where it's at. So now we get to deal with people that are not from here, that don't have a place to go, so they're homeless on our streets, just got out of prison. And we wonder why we're not more successful, because I don't know how we expect that somebody who's been in prison for 10 years, we just open the door, they go to a strange city, they have no resources, no reentry program, no assistance, none of that, and we expect them to be successful. So I'm all for letting people out of prison as long as they're the appropriate people and they have reentry services to help them get a driver's license, get a job, whatever it is they need. But we are not doing that right now. And so as you see crime going up across the country, I think that's there's many reasons, but that's definitely, in my opinion, one of them. So in terms of defunding, I believe there are things that we can do much different. Like, for example, you might not know this, but when a police officer goes to the academy, when they first get hired, we send them to a 6-month academy that's very rigorous, very intense. The day they graduate from that academy, they still have several more months of training out in the field with the training officer. But the day they graduate from that academy, they have the legal authority to put what we call a 5150 hold on somebody. That's a mental health hold if somebody's a danger to themselves or others. Now you might ask, well, who else has the ability to put a 3-day, 72-hour mental health hold on? Hardly nobody else. So we routinely get calls from mental health providers, from doctors, from counselors, to our comm center to have police officers come to their office and put a hold on their patient. I don't think that makes much sense, as our officers get mental health training, but clearly not as much as a mental health worker, clearly not as much as a social worker, clearly not as much as a mental health doctor. And so we routinely get that call. And for example, we hired a social worker, licensed social worker. She teaches at Sac State. She's a manager in our department. She manages 2 teams of officers. One is the mental health team. One is the homeless impact team. So she has every letter of the alphabet, if you will, after her name. MSW, LCW. I just always say she has the alphabet behind her name. She has umpteen hours of mental health training. She teaches social work and mental health training. She cannot put a hold on somebody. That 21-year-old officer that graduated from the academy can put a hold on somebody that she is their boss, and she can't. So those are some of the things like that we need to change. Some of the calls we'll get a call, there's a homeless camp across the street from my house. No violence, nothing going on. It's just a tent across the street from somebody's home. We might not need to send an officer to that. We need to send homeless service providers to that. For example, there's a city ordinance that says people can camp on City Hall's property overnight, but then they have to leave at 6 o'clock in the morning. And so our police officers, our bike officers downtown go to City Hall every day, and they walk around 6 o'clock, let's go. So the homeless folks pack up their stuff and they basically walk across the street to Cesar Chavez Park. Now, ask yourself, why are police officers doing that? Why wouldn't the homeless service providers go at 6 o'clock in the morning and have resources and stuff and tell them it's time to move on? There's no violence, there's no resistance. They just pack up and leave whenever the officers. But the homeless service providers that we fund through the city tell us they won't do that. They say it's too dangerous. So we need to fix some of these things. Some of our CPS I just got a call a couple weeks ago from one of the community-based organizations, City of Refuge, which again, I think I might have mentioned this last time. If anybody's looking for a place to help out, whether it's financially or just with your time, City of Refuge, they do a lot of things, but one of the main things they do is they rescue women from sex trafficking. They have a couple houses in Oak Park. They're an amazing organization. They called CPS like at 10 o'clock at night because they had a 5-year-old that needed to be put in protective custody. No suspects around, no parents around. They took the child to their house, and CPS would not respond without a police officer. And she was telling them, you don't need a police officer. There's no threat here. There's no danger. The people that are abusing this child are not here. And they refused to respond without a police officer. And so it's stuff like that that I think we can change a lot and allow officers to deal with things that only officers can deal with. Because even in a mental health case where somebody's in the middle of the street shooting off a gun, which we had last year at 20th and K, you're not going to send a social worker to that. You need to send a police officer to that to make it safe. And then a social worker or somebody can come after that to provide this person the services that they need. So we're not there again tomorrow with him shooting a gun off in the middle of the street. So to me, that's what defunding is. We've created the social worker I talked about, Bridget Dean, the city manager has recently appointed her as the acting director of this new Department of Community Response. And so she is actively investigating how do we create a new department and who is in it that can either outright handle some of these calls in some instances, but also be a resource to the officers once they render the scene safe, that they could come and provide the resources that our community needs. Most of our officer-involved shootings involve mental health. And so in my mind, if we do a better job at addressing mental health, that will cut down a lot of shootings all by itself, because our mental health system has fallen apart through bad budget times and stuff like that. And for example, when we do put a hold on somebody, we take them to the emergency room. There's nowhere else to take them now. So they sit in the hallway at UC Davis or somewhere else. The officer has to stay with them for hours until the hospital staff, mental health staff, can come down and evaluate them. In the meantime, they're in the most expensive location they could possibly be, an emergency room that is not fit for mental health. It's fit for physical health. And not to mention the stigma of mental health that needs to be addressed, so people treat mental health like they do a broken leg or something like that, which we don't do in society, but we need to. When we do that, we'll be a lot more successful. So that's probably took a little bit longer on that than I should have, but that's defunding. I mentioned already the protesters versus the looters. The early protests for George Floyd, we had thousands of people downtown, and a lot of them became looters, and that's kind of mob mentality kind of thing. It just got rolling and people just started looting. That was still a protest. That was very difficult because there was just regular protesters mixed in with people that just were coming down to take advantage of the situation. So it's very difficult to deal with those kind of protests when you know there's a lot of just regular protesters in the mix, and then there's people that want to cause damage and harm, and they're all mixed together. So that's tougher than these last couple days, where it's pretty much just people dressed in helmets and shields. They'd cut garbage cans in half and make it a shield. They'd carry pipes, rocks. They had a bottle of urine that I assume they were going to throw on somebody. I'm not sure what they were going to do with that. But their intent was to assault officers and get officers into a large confrontation so they could keep this going. And we listened to them say they wanted to make this like Portland and tear stuff up. Well, it didn't happen. So, so we value protesters. This country has been built on protest, if you will, for many, many decades and centuries, and that is a constitutional right. But when it comes to people wanting to burn our buildings down and harm people and kill people like we've seen in other cities, that's a whole different group. I wouldn't even call them protesters. And then lastly, the impact of COVID. So like all of you, COVID is something we've never experienced before. I've never personally experienced or work experienced. It's just a whole new world. And so from officers having to wear masks when it's 100 degrees outside, I know all of you have probably had masks on. It feels like my temperature goes up 10 degrees as soon as I put that mask on. It's like, makes you like, I wasn't hot until I put this mask on. Now I'm burning up. So just imagine now there's an officer with a vest on and a uniform on and 30 pounds of equipment on. They're outside in the temperatures and now the bad, unhealthy air, and they're wearing a N95 or lesser mask. So that's a challenge. The rules have changed numerous times over the last several months. So one day you got to wear your mask all the time. The next day, maybe not. And so, you know, it's kind of tough. We have a guy, one of our captains we call him Captain COVID. He's in charge of all things COVID. So he sends out an email just about every day with the changes of rules. And so it's tough with 1,000 employees trying to make sure they know the rules and make sure they get it right. We get complaints whenever an officer's not wearing a mask. Somebody will call in, hey, your officer wasn't wearing a mask. Oh, gee, thanks for telling us. So it's tough trying to keep up, just like it is for all of you. The other thing I would just say is this. I think, and this is just my personal opinion, now it does play out work-wise because I guess I make the rules for our department. I don't think the health order is equitable. I just don't. I don't think it's fair. So for example, I'll just use myself. I grew up in Oak Park. And what I would do every day was either play football in the middle of the street, go down to the park and play basketball, hang out on the corner. In the summertime, go to the local pool, usually at Sac High, every once in a while at the park, but typically at Sac High, and go swimming with my friends. All those things are now criminalized and they're all a misdemeanor in the health order, every one of them. Now, if you have financial means, many of the things that you might do are legal in the health order. For example, golfing. And I don't say this for the golfers on this channel trying to take away your golf, but golfing is legal. So I drive by the golf course every day and I watch people standing a foot away from each other at the hole, no masks on. Just saw a tournament yesterday, 2 to a cart, doing all sorts of things. And that's legal. Hiking in the foothills is legal. Swimming in your own personal pool is legal, but the community pools are shut down. The apartment complex pools are shut down. So I just ask you, if you were me when I was a kid, what do you expect me to do? Everything I did as a kid is illegal in that health order. But if I live somewhere else and I went golfing or I have my own pool or any of those things, all those things are legal. And I'm not saying to make somebody's personal pool illegal, and now you fast forward to where are most of our officers working? Most of our officers work in neighborhoods like Del Paso Heights and Meadowview, because again, that's where we get the vast majority of our calls for help from the community. So couple that with the cultural beliefs of, say, just the Black community and the Hispanic community. As you know, COVID, there's disproportionate people getting COVID in the Black community and the Hispanic community. And a lot of that is a lot of the famous Black rappers early on were saying Black people can't get COVID. Clearly that's wrong, but that's what they were saying. And some of our cultures, multiple generations of families live together. Clearly that's not as good for COVID because, you know, as my nephews were going out still partying and everything, then they'd go over to my in-laws' house and I'm like, stop it. They're in their 70s. You can't go out to the club and then go over to grandma's house without a mask on. Like you're gonna, and my in-laws, they look healthy, but they have plenty of medical issues and they're in their mid to late 70s. And, you know, I just look at it as if they get it, they're gonna die. So we have to prevent them from getting it. So in light of all that, if we enforced, say, the mask law in the ordinance or any number of other things, who do we think is going to get those tickets? There's going to be disproportionate minority population getting those tickets because that's where we work. And those are the communities that can't do anything that's legal per the health order. And so say we give 50% of our tickets are African-American and they're only 15% of our population. The very lawmakers that made these rules are going to say the police officers are racist because they disproportionately gave people these tickets, when in reality, the law itself has an issue. And anybody in their right mind could anticipate it. So our department from the beginning has been in education mode. And by education mode, I mean when we see or get called to somebody that is potentially violating the health order, we will educate them on what the health order is not give a citation. If it's a business, and I don't think these things should be criminalized anyway. So if you're a business that, say you're supposed to only have 50% capacity in your restaurant and you have 70% capacity, my opinion is that needs to be dealt with through your permit, not criminalize you, not take you to jail for that. That's a business issue. And the city should either fine you or do something with your permit to get you to comply with the health order, not send a police officer to now put you in the criminal justice system because you didn't comply with a health order. So as far as the Sacramento Police Department, we have never issued one citation for the health order, and we're not going to. You might get one from code enforcement if you're a business. You wouldn't get a criminal citation. Something would happen permit-wise, or some fine or warning or something like that. So COVID's a interesting thing. As you all have probably seen, there's different information that comes out each day. It's morphing every day as they learn more and research more about it. It's causing all sorts of problems. Our suicides went up drastically, especially among young people. We had 2 teenagers commit suicide, totally unrelated from each other in the Thomas in the same day early on. Suicides are dramatically up. Stress is way up because people losing their jobs, can't go to school. My daughters play sports nonstop, competitively across the country. So they're like a normal day before our COVID. I wake up at 4:30 every morning. I'd wake my daughters up at 5:30. They would go to school. They would get out of school, immediately come home and do homework for like an hour, and then they'd go to their different sports practices. There's not any day of the week we would get home before 9:30 at night for their practices. So imagine that. You're like busy 110% of the time as a 15 and a 13-year-old, and one day it all just stops. No practices, no school, can't go to the park, can't do anything. And now imagine if you're in a not as quite a healthy family, healthy neighborhood, healthy circumstances as my daughters are. Well, your mental health, my daughters and my wife's mental health was impacted by this greatly. I mean, I'll say it now, we currently still take my youngest daughter to counseling because of this. So it's just, it's tough, and domestic violence is up. So I'm probably just like every one of you. I can't wait till this COVID thing goes away and people can start getting back to some sort of normal life, because not just COVID, but the impacts of COVID are greatly impacting our communities, and it's not healthy. There's a ton of businesses that will never come back. They've already said they won't come back. And, hopefully eventually some other business will take over. But, and a lot of times, especially these small businesses, these are people that have spent their whole life savings trying to start this small business. And now it's gone. And, they're left to pick up the pieces. And then we have these violent protests like we have over the last couple of days that tear up their businesses also. And so that's just another cost and another reason for people to leave Sacramento and go somewhere else. And that's not healthy. That's not good for the business community, but it's also not good for us as a community as a whole, because those taxes and those sort of things are what funds parks and community centers and public safety and all those sort of things. So hopefully I answered all those questions I was supposed to, and I'd be happy to answer or attempt to answer anybody's questions that they might have. I think somebody's going to help coordinate that.
Yeah, thank you, Chief Hahn, for being here, and thank you for all your efforts. As we all keep saying, unprecedented times, and your job is the farthest thing from easy, so we really appreciate you. And we wanted to thank you for those bags you gave us. We did go through those really quickly. We're always looking to share resources with our membership, so we greatly appreciate that too. So we have a few questions, and some of them are kind of a lot, so I'm going to try to simplify. A couple people asked how you're identifying these groups, Antifa and other groups. I know someone asked about far-right groups like the Proud Boys, how you're identifying them, and if you kind of talk about that a little bit.
Sure. Well, fortunately, they post a lot. So they announce when they're coming, and that's how they get people to come. So some of them get a little bit secretive and use alternate ways to communicate, and sometimes our intel people figure that out and participate in those ways too. And I'll just leave it at that. But it's very public. because they're trying to get large numbers of people there. And so we have, I mean, you can go on, I think it's Twitter, and look up Sacramento Antifa. There's a local chapter of Antifa here. Proud Boys, same thing. They have a website. They have, or well, I don't know if they have a website, but they have social media. So they often will say where they're going because they want to get people there. The other telltale sign is I've never seen a protest in our town that I would call a protest where they come with helmets, masks, gas masks, bulletproof vests, pipes, sticks. Unfortunately, we're not an open carry state, but in these other states, they walk to the protest with an AR-15 strapped to their back. I couldn't imagine working in an environment like that. So not only do they announce that they're coming, but it's very visible when they show up, those, at least those groups. And Proud Boys is like the opposite of Antifa. So places like Portland and Seattle, which is their strongholds, where their home bases are, they dress the same, but they often clash and they fight with each other and they shoot at each other in the middle of these protests. So we don't really have that because we're not a home base for either one of them. Our Antifa group here in Sacramento is pretty small. But yeah, they announce themselves. And then there's other groups like, and I never heard of this group until about a month ago at one of our protests, but the Boogaloos, and you can just Google them. I think it's Wikipedia has a thing on them. I've been a cop for 33 years. I never heard of the Boogaloos. But the Boogaloos, they're a white supremacist group, kind of out of Alaska primarily. And they, kind of interesting that they're primarily from Alaska, but they wear Hawaiian shirts and then they wear bulletproof vests over the top of their Hawaiian shirts, and they carry guns and do that sort of thing. So if you remember in Oakland, when the George Floyd protests first started, that the federal agents that got shot and one died, the Boogaloos shot him. And then they didn't know who shot him, but they knew the van, it was a van description. They did a bunch of investigation. And the next day they found the van in Santa Cruz, and the Santa Cruz deputies approached the house in the van, and the guy shot and killed the Santa Cruz deputy, and they arrested, he's a Boogaloo. Him and his partner were Boogaloos. They ended up that they're the ones that shot the federal agents in Oakland. Then they went to Santa Cruz and they shot and killed the deputy in Santa Cruz. But they were ex-military, and they used the protests as cover. So they don't care anything about George Floyd or the protest issue. Their goal is to kill federal law enforcement agents. That's one of their desires. And so they use the protests to cover that. Well, we had the Boogaloos here in Sacramento. They were at Chavez Park about a month ago in the heart of the heat of the George Floyd protest, because as I'm in the command center, we're looking at these 4 guys that stuck out like a sore thumb, all really big, pretty big guys, but they're wearing Hawaiian shirts with bulletproof vests with big backpacks on. And we're like, wow, those 4 don't look like they belong here. Like, they're totally different. They weren't interacting with the rest of the crowd. So we sent officers to contact them. We identified them. They were from Alaska. And then they slipped away. They got into their car and they got on the freeway and got away before we could get them completely stopped. But that was the day after the guy killed the federal agents in Oakland. So I have no doubt that was their plan here. But Chavez Park is kind of a problem spot for them because it's out in the open. It's not right next to a freeway. So they would have had a problem shooting somebody and getting away. And then we stopped them. And I think that kind of made them know they had our attention. And so, but I have no doubt their plan was to kill somebody in this protest. And we just, narrowly avoided it. So, yeah, so a lot of times it's very easy to tell who these folks are that are not regular. I mean, protesters look like you and me. Like, they're just regular people that are chanting, screaming, marching around our city. When you start seeing people look like a SWAT officer that's not a SWAT officer, that ain't a protester.
Right. Thank you for the clarification. We had a couple questions about curfews. How, what's the process in implementing that? Why do you guys do that? And, I know with all the protests, people are wondering if a curfew is going to be put in place again.
Yeah, so we did not do a curfew this last time. We've done a curfew one time in the heat of the George Floyd protest when there are thousands of protesters. And I was somewhat reluctant to advise a curfew, and then it got, slightly out of control. And so well, not slightly, for that couple nights, it was very out of control with the looting and everything, and decided that and the National Guard was probably good. Now, the council is who implements curfew. And so they have to vote on it, and they have to, say the times and all that. Curfew doesn't do us much good when in the heat of the protests, when there's anywhere from 200 to 1,000, because if we go in there, the fight is on over a misdemeanor. That on the George Floyd protests, I think we arrested maybe 60 to 80 people for curfew. The city attorney dropped every single one of them. So for a misdemeanor that's not going to be prosecuted, I'm not under, unless it's dire circumstances, going to put my officers in harm's way and community in harm's way to do that. Now, where it is useful is as the protest breaks up, people still linger and walk around, and as soon as you're not looking, they break into a building and loot or set a building on fire. It is useful for that, because that's where most of our arrests came. We were able to stop them and take them out to Cal Expo, the processing center, and get them out of downtown. So it is useful for certain things like that. And so we will continue to consider it on a case-by-case basis. And if council asks our opinion on it, we will give our opinion on it. And also, a lot of the businesses, you can't carve out just this block will have a curfew and then those other 10 blocks won't. So a lot of times, unless it's under dire circumstances, the businesses don't want a curfew either, because then they have to close. Nobody can come down there. And so it's a pretty sweeping, drastic change for a free country. So I don't give my advice on that carelessly, because I think it is imposing a lot of rules on people. And so I wouldn't recommend it unless we really need it.
Right, that makes sense. I guess we'll end on this one, because I know we kept you for long enough. How much more help or funding do you think that the city needs in order to respond to, the nonviolent homeless folks that you've discussed, and kind of mental health? I know that's a loaded question, but I really appreciate that you touched on that. So if you could kind of go into that a little more.
Yeah, I just think that's really one of several key questions that I think we as society really need to ask ourselves. What fundamentally do we want law enforcement to do? And then how do we holistically address the issues that ail us? For example, I gave a bunch of examples of how we give city funding to organizations that I think don't do what they should do. So when everything else fails, people call the police department. And that's how we have continued as a police department to take on more roles and more roles and more roles. For example, we have a mental health team. There's 6 officers and a sergeant on a mental health team, and they carry a caseload of chronic mental health people where they're trying to assist the person with mental health issues and their family access resources and prevent them from having a mental health breakdown or crisis. We also have a homeless impact team that all they do is work with homeless providers and the homeless population, trying to get them help. There's other cities, there's one in Arizona, I think it's Tucson, Arizona, that when you get arrested, if you have a drug problem, they start that process while you're in custody, because you have to get sober while you're in custody most of the time. You can still get drugs in jail, but typically you sober up in custody, and they have different drugs that you can take that block the benefits of the illegal drugs. Meaning, if I'm addicted to heroin and I take heroin, I can take this other drug that blocks the ability of heroin to get me high. And that's how people get sober. And so there's a couple cities that start that in custody, because you're a captive audience and you have to get sober, and you can't start it until you're sober. And then they carry it on with you out as you get released, like a reentry program, where then you're handed off to some community-based organization that has funding that continues both the drug treatment and the counseling that goes along with the drug treatment. It's programs like that that I think we need here in Sacramento. So we flew out, some of our staff flew out some folks from the mayor's office and city manager's office to Arizona to look at their program, which is an awesome program. Because I think we need programs like that here. A large amount of our crime, regardless of what kind of crime it is driven by drugs. So the burglars are breaking into your house because they're feeding their drug habit. So we can arrest them 20 times a month for burglarizing, but until they get their drug habit under control, they're going to break into your house tomorrow as soon as they get released. The jail has zero bail right. So, you know, if we arrest somebody now, they get out about an hour and a half later, regardless of what we arrest them for. Shooting at somebody, they'll get released an hour and a half later. Illegal gun in their possession, hour and a half later, they'll get released because there's zero bail now imposed by the judges, I think because of COVID. So for example, last week in McClatchy Park, which is in Oak Park, there was a girl that just turned 18 a month ago. She shot at her and two of her friends shot at two other people in a car over 50 times in the middle of the day, shooting two people. We found her about 2 days later and arrested her for attempted murder. Fortunately, neither one of the people she shot were killed. They were both hit multiple times. We had arrested her a week earlier for possession of a gun. Now remind yourself, I said she just turned 18 a month earlier. She got out an hour and a half after we arrested her a week earlier for an illegal gun, and now somebody almost died, and she's gonna go to prison for probably, I don't know, next 30 years unless she gets out on zero bail. So, I mean, I just think, I don't know, you know, the story I told you earlier about the prison releases, zero bail, letting all these folks out. Again, I do think we need to do something about our criminal justice system and the number of people that are in prison, but just letting folks out the front door without any reentry, without addressing any of the underlying issues, without some sort of assistance to help people integrate back into society after spending, in some cases, 20, 30 years in prison. I don't know what we're expecting other than what we're getting. And I don't know if any of you have ever toured a prison, but you can't spend 20 years there and expect to walk out the front door without any reentry program and expect to be successful. It's just not a realistic expectation. And so I think to answer the original question, I just think we need to look at this holistically and be very prudent with our money, because the money is light and it's precious. It's the people's money. And we need to utilize organizations and services that actually can show that they're making an impact. We need to work better together to ensure that we help people improve their lives and give them the resources that they need. Otherwise, we're going to keep seeing, you know, lives just being wasted, whether they're through drugs or mental health. I mean, just drive downtown, you can see lives just destroyed, laying around on our sidewalks and streets. And you just have to ask yourself, how many of those people, if we had a really holistic system, would not be laying there, would have got help earlier, wouldn't be going in and out of prison. So right now, like, for example, if people get arrested, most of the time they're not going to do any time, so they'll get fined. And so say you're homeless or you have mental health or both, which is frequent, drug problems, and your fines just start piling up. Now all of a sudden you have $60,000 in fines. What happens when you get your stuff together? You go to rehab, you sober up, you get the counseling you need, and now you're ready for society. You have a $60,000 bill waiting for you. So when you do get a job, you're going to be paying off all these fines. And so I just think we've got to bring all these different systems together, see what's working, what's not working, and integrate them to where people can get to their resources. I'll give you another example. If you were a raging drug addict and you hit your bottom, you hit your point where, okay, I'm done with this life, I'm ready for help. And you showed up at our front door here at headquarters and said, I've been a drug addict for the last 5 years, I'm ready to get help. There's nothing I can do for you. You get on a waiting list and maybe 6 months later you get a phone call and say there's something for you. I just think in a country like ours, that's a failure, that we can't keep affording to do that when people are ready. My younger brother got addicted to drugs and was living downtown, and he was murdered for it. He was killed downtown at 19th and G on my shift while I was working, and I identified him. I so much wish we could have got him help before that happened, because he'd still be alive today. So I just, to again answer your question, we got so many things that we need to do and coordinate to save people's lives and reduce the impact on our entire community, that we need to start coordinating these. And I'll just end on this. We have, if we were fully staffed right now on the sworn side, we are authorized 731 officers. We have a city of 530,000 people. We are one of the lower staffed departments in the entire country. 12 years ago, we had over 800 officers. So now, even if we were fully staffed, which we're not, we're at about 680 something, we would be 70 plus officers lower than we were 12 years ago. Our city's larger. Our city has more festivals. The King's new arena brings tons of people downtown. And so we have very few resources to deal with the needs of the capital city of California. And in addition to that, we're called to a bunch of calls that would not only are not law enforcement calls, but would be better served by people with experience and resources in other areas like social workers and some of those other things. So when we talk about creating a new department, the city, I should say, so it wouldn't be part of the police department, and taking calls away from the police department, that is a good thing. Now, they won't outright take the vast majority of calls away. There are some calls that flat out would never involve the police department, would get channeled from dispatch over to there. But we have to be very careful with that. And that's what I keep preaching, that you can't just say all non-criminal calls go to this new department, because the vast majority of calls that come into our dispatch center are not known crimes when they come in. You don't know it's a crime until the officer gets there. So like I've heard other cities, I think San Francisco's one, we're gonna send all family disturbances to this new department, that it will be social workers or whatever. I go, you're gonna get people killed doing that. If you remember Tara Sullivan, just an amazing, amazing person and an officer, young officer just out of the academy. The call she got murdered on was to help a woman go get her clothes and her dog. That's what the call was. Nobody was getting arrested. Nobody was, she wasn't fighting right at that moment with her boyfriend. It was to help her get her clothes and her dog, and the guy murdered her. So we have to be very careful of how we decide what calls are going to be shifted to this department, because I don't want people to be killed. So the second bucket of calls will be calls that officers still respond on, but as soon as they get it calmed down, and so there's no threat of violence anymore or danger, then we get on the radio or the phone, and this other department can immediately respond, and the officers can leave and go handle another call that only officers can handle. So we have a lot of work to do, but I think we're starting to head down that direction, and hopefully it will get people help, because we tend to only deal with the end result instead of some of the stuff that came before the very end that could have prevented that guy from being a 10-year drug addict or on the street for 10 years. And some people just aren't ready, so that's fine. But we have a lot of people that with the right resources and the right people would be ready. And so I think we need to progress down that road more. I still have more time if you do. I think I have. Oh, no, never mind. I don't have.
I was going to jump in and say, Chief Hahn, we really appreciate you taking the time to share your perspective and personal insight to, not only the city, but how things all come together and the difficult decisions that you and your team and officers are making right now. We can't thank you enough. We know you're really busy, and but sharing this perspective, I think, really helps all of us come together as a city even tighter when we understand the things that you and your officers are facing. So again, we really appreciate your time, and I will offer on behalf of the realtors, if there's anything that we can do on throughout this process as these policies are coming together or communicating it to our members, please don't hesitate to reach out to me or anyone from the association, and we would be happy to be there as part of that. So I will
thank you so much, and I really appreciate you handing out those resources to new homeowners.
Yeah.
Homeowners, whatever they might be, from out of town or from some other neighborhood, because I think the more people know how to access information and resources in our community, the better off we are going to be as a community.
Absolutely. Thank you again. And I'll turn it back over to Judy.
Thank you, Erin. I just want to say thank you again, Police Chief Hahn, for giving us this informative update. We appreciate you. We appreciate your time. And thank you again for joining us today.
Thank you, Judy.
Okay. Police Chief Hahn, if you want to leave us, we're waving you goodbye.
All right.
Okay. Thanks. Okay, everybody, that was an informative update. I didn't expect some of the things that he was going to say, but I do appreciate everything that he said today. We did have a technical glitch. Don't know what happened. Totally freaked me out because I thought it was just me, but here we are to finish our meeting, and it's now time for announcements. I would like to present the election results for our 2021 officers and directors. Our 2021 president-elect is Erin Stump. Our 2021 secretary, treasurer is Sherry Hunt. And directors for the term running 1/1/2021 to 12/31/2022, Rosanna Garcia, Barbara Lebrecht, Ujjal Breeze Singh, Louis Sumter, Maurice Thomas, and Samantha Toe Wiesency. I'm sorry, Samantha, if I mess it up, you can call me and correct me, and I won't never do it again. But let's say congratulations to all of them, and we look forward to working with you. Thank you. So at this time, I'd like to welcome Frank Sino from Scholarship. He has an announcement to make.
Actually, it'll be me, Kaylee Sedler. Frank will not be joining us, so I will be announcing that registration is open for the SAR Scholarship Haunted Hustle. Join us in a virtual fun run or walk and help send local high school seniors to college. Entry is $35 and you will receive a commemorative race t-shirt. Form a team of 20 or more and you'll get a commemorative plaque of our learning tree. There are limited sponsorship opportunities that are still available. You can visit us at sacaor.redpodium.com/haunted hustle for more information or to register your team or yourself. Any questions, contact Madison at mhal@sacrealtor.org.
Thank you, Kaylee. And continuing with our announcements, each September, SAR's Education Committee presents a premier educational program for new and returning realtors. This year's Real Estate Training Institute will be like none other, beginning September 11th. Registered students can access ready classes from the comfort of their own homes, held on Fridays, usually from 9 a.m. to the real estate training. I'm sorry, guys, I have just lost my spot. Just bear with me. So, the classes will be held on September 11th. Students can access the ready classes from their home. It's held on Fridays, usually from 9 a.m. to noon. Real Estate Training Institute provides you with many of the basics you need to start your business. Learn some of the tricks of the trade from those who have years of practical experience. And due to the challenges of the pandemic, we've reduced the price from $120 to $50 for the full series. That's a good deal. If you attended SAR's new member orientation within the past year, you are entitled to a 25% discount. Also, Education Club card holders can save up to 75% off on the series. Read your Monday SAR Education email for the details. The Retail Center. They have new custom COVID-19 riders. Since realtors cannot have open houses at this time, we have created custom rider signs for the realtors to display for the public to schedule individual showings by appointment. And some of the signs read, no open house, call me for a showing, shown by appointment. The new COVID-19 signs, they're corrugated. It's high in demand signs. They're now in stock. Prices range from $6 to $9.50 each, one of the best values in the retail center. PPE products in stock at the retail center. Visit the retail center and say the magic word PPE 19 and receive a discount of 19% on your purchase. The newest items in are breathable and washable face masks. Don't worry, we've got you covered. Gift baskets are becoming a hot item in the realtor's store. These are baskets that you, of course, can give to your clients as closing gifts. Now let's welcome back Erin Teague with the Government Affairs Update.
Good morning, everyone. As we get closer to Election Day, there's no shortage of fun, changing evolution of information. And in addition to that, last night was the deadline for the end of the legislative session. So there's lots of moving parts that are happening. One of the ones that was probably most in the news was the governor reached a deal because, as many of you know, the eviction moratoriums were going to expire based on the decision by Judicial Council. And so AB 3088 was signed by Governor Newsom last night. The highlights of this one is it allows renters that have been affected by COVID to tenants do not have to immediately repay the rent they missed between March and August, although landlords will be able to sue them to recover the money beginning as early as March of 2021. Tenants must pay 25% of their rent from September 1st through January 31st to be protected from eviction. Landlords will also be able to sue tenants in civil court to obtain unpaid rent. Come February 1st of 2021, those will be set to expire and tenants will have to start making full payments. Currently, if renters can't pay the 25% moving forward, they can be evicted starting February of 2021. Some people, one component of this is that for high income renters seeking assistance, they'll have to, under penalty of perjury, submit a form declaring the financial distress. And a major part of this was that landlords can still evict tenants who create disturbances or refuse to provide rent but have the finances to make the payment. So this is something that came while it is not a perfect solution and there's still a lot to be worked out. There's been a lot of advocating for more support to renters that go directly to landlords. And this was a process that had to move quickly because of the looming deadline that came forward. So that's been signed and will look to go into place. But I think that this conversation is not over and we'll continue to work through the process. And I think even post 2021, there'll be some more conversations about this in the process. So just keep aware of that. Also, rent control, and if you've been following along with that saga, I'm sure there's a meme or something that someone could make that would be funnier than I can come up with for a tagline, but yes, no, it's on, it's off, it's on, it's off. So that's the continuing thing, but currently ballots went to print last week. So it is on, Measure C will be on the ballot, which is the rent control measure that was submitted by the voter by signatures. So originally the city had sued to receive declaratory relief so that they would not have to put it on the ballot. And they cited a variety of different reasons. Most importantly, that it was not an amendment, but it was a complete charter revision. And so therefore it would need to go through a different process. Michelle Parasette and her attorneys appealed that decision, and while the appeals court believes that it should go through the process and likely will have the same outcome, they told the city of Sacramento that they would need to put the ballot measure on the ballot while the courts worked it out. So the city was required to have an emergency meeting where they put the Measure C on the ballot. The No on Measure C campaign is in full force, and SAR is definitely part of the executive steering committee on that and how that comes forward and is shaped. And really what the polling has showed us is, you know, with the concerns of mail-in ballots and the post office and different things, it's going to be very important that the messaging gets out very quickly to voters. And in all actuality, voter contact will begin. Today is September 1st, and it is slated to start today with mail and voter contact through phones. And the messaging from that is that Measure C is a deeply flawed ballot measure to create a rental housing board that does nothing to solve our housing problem. Measure C is a charter amendment on the November ballot that fails to tackle the heart of the problem and the need for more affordable housing. Unfortunately, Measure C is so flawed and poorly written that will only make the problems worse. So that's just a very big, broad, as I'm sure many of you know, a lot of things are talked about in broad sense and broken down into sound bites for not only the electorate, but also news media and things like that. So that's kind of the broad brush strokes of how the campaign will take shape. I'll be sure to put the no on Measure C portion into the chat box as soon as I'm done talking, because my multitasking skills are not that great on Zoom. So the other piece I wanted to talk to people about that is coming up quickly. I know we have a lot of announcements to get to. Many of you, I'm sure, saw the SACB this morning, and I thought it was great. It talked about mail-in ballots and the process, and it was a great Q&A about it. And I just wanted to share some of the highlights from that, because I think another thing to mention is in the national news especially, there's a lot of concern about mail-in ballots versus absentee ballots with the post office. And I do have to share that, you know, one of the things that's really significant about California is we have already had a robust mail-in ballot process in place for several election cycles, and we're a voter choice county. So this is something that as voters we're much more rehearsed in. Our system is and infrastructure based on this is much more sophisticated than it is in a lot of states. And so I think that's something we should be focused on. That being said, I want to remind everyone it will be very important to vote early, and do get your ballot. If you decide to mail it in early. If you decide to drop it off at a voting center, those will be open 10 days in advance of the election. And then there's also polling locations, which will be a reduced number in Sacramento County because of the Voter Choice Act, but those will be open 3 days prior to the election. So we're not all tied to the election day deadline that we normally are. But that being said, I just want to share with you that, to my point, in the 2018 general election, 65% of California ballots were cast by mail. In the 2020 primary, which occurred in the first weeks of March before the county was shut down due to coronavirus, 72% of the ballots were cast by mail. So this is something that we're already used to. But I do want to remind everyone that in order for your ballot to be counted, it needs to be postmarked by November 3rd on election day, and then there will be 17 days for those ballots to make it through the mail to the elections office. And the elections office has 30 days after that to certify the results. So I think in some of these local elections, we're not going to see the, you know, midnight announcement of some of these tighter races, which is another reason why I would argue that please make sure to vote down the ballot for your local elected officials, because they are really going to be impactful for the decisions that and policies that come out of our local elected jurisdictions. So that will be something very important. The other piece that I want to share is the Secretary of State's office does have a vote tracker. So your ballot can be tracked if you fill it out. So I will again share that link I think in the chat box as well. Or maybe it goes into the Q&A. I know I'll put it in both places so everyone has it, and we'll make sure it gets out into the weekly docket so you can all see it. But it's a really unique function where you type in your information and you can actually see where your ballot is in the process. So please remember, ballots will be coming in the mail around October 5th. So make sure once you get that, you fill it out, and make sure you get it in the mail or dropped off at a early voting center. So that's my report for today.
Thank you, Erin. And everyone, let's give Erin Teague a hand. She has been with the Sacramento Association of Realtors for 1 year as of last week. So thank you, Erin.
Thank you, everyone. It's been wonderful, and I love being here. And there's been it's been a wild ride, but at least you guys keep it interesting.
I have no idea what she means by a wild ride, so I'm just going to let that rest for now. I want to thank you for attending. Thank you for, if you were knocked off and you came back on, thank you for that. Our next main meeting is scheduled for Tuesday, October the 6th. We will keep you updated on different events on Facebook and on our website, so keep an eye on them. And I would ask that each and every one of you have a safe Labor Day weekend. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a good day. Go out and sell some real estate.